Early this morning, I was browsing through the emails I had gotten that night. A new Facebook updates, a little spam, a newsletter, and an email from a sender named with no more. The address was hope underscore abandoned. The subject, tarnished gold. I was intrigued. I opened up my email to find a wall of text simply with I hear you in the market for a creepy Pokemon things. There is one for you, and enjoy. And then I began to read. Being someone who isn't really a computer savvy has been someone from the generation could be. I know very little about what technology is capable of, aside from the email. I am an occasional download of something, otherwise unattainable for me at the moment. I have about the same amount of knowledge as an 80-year-old might suppose as such about the electronic world. For example, if for the sake of this tale I'm about to recount, I was totally unaware of someone capable of hacking Pokemon games to make their own sub-story of the world, even less so that it would be possible to make a physical copy of the game in a real cartridge. However, I happened to learn about this one of the most disturbing ways as possible. When I was younger, Pokemon Gold was my very first game of the popular franchise. I became very attached to it, little creatures of my characters, named after myself, even though the characters were male. And even though I was fantasized about the characters and the adventures we would go on and through a preset storyline had not been in place. Now that wasn't quite important though. What was important was the fact that I never truly let go of my childhood fantasies. The memories have been, the first game where you've cherished it and to set it free, as much as I still have my old gold game, completed with the total of the copy of Glitch. Now, I refused to start my game though, because it was too much of the old magic would be lost. I wanted to play a whole new game of the version that I recall being the happiest thing, but Ultra cartridges were rather hard to find outside the internet nowadays. Most of my local flea markets are Game Boy Advance games, hardly any being Pokemon. Unfortunately for me, my grandmother still fully supports long-lasting love for Pokemon and often buys boxes of cards, toys, videotapes, and other items she comes across when her frequent visits to local abductions. Granted, very little of these things that she gives me are in good condition. Long forgotten items that showed a way of being musty basement after a phrase of the owner's life past are hardly are. But as gifts from a dear relative, I cherish them as if they were made of gold. Pun not intended, that is. Most recently, she gave me a box of the brand new videotape containing episodes from the early on in the first season. Several hundred battered were used cards, and the game cartridge had no label. The cartridge was a familiar metallic gold color of the game that I had been looking for, even though the label had been removed and a large X was drawn in Sharpie in place where the sticker should have been. I couldn't easily tell what it was, but what was the color? You had imagined for the excitement finally getting another copy. I hate ordering things online. This was rather big relief. I thanked her profusely and promised that I would play it as soon as I get home, which I did. Getting started was difficult, not because the game was faulty, but because I had sold my Game Boy Advance to my brother several years ago, and for his better Pokemon cards. Once something belongs to him, it's difficult to get lended back out to me. Such as sibling reasons, I suppose. As much as bribery, I finally got my hands on my former Game Boy Advance and quickly inserted the vandalized game. Chills ran down my body as I was opening the movie for the game to play, sending a wave of nostalgia crashing over me. It was good to see it again. The game then opened normally, and a pixelated image of Ho-Ho flying across the sky beneath the tile presented itself before leading to the normal selection screen. The person who owned the game still had the game on the file, so I cared very little about what someone else did before me. Consider the condition of their things. They must have been very young. I was bound to meet with a team full of a Pikachu and with ridiculous names. I started a new game. It was there I realized something wasn't quite right with the game. The normal intro involving a professor introducing you to the world of Pokemon didn't play out. It went like this. It all started with a black screen, and it was quite familiar considering that's how Gold, Silver, and Crystal games begin. But instead of the normal "what time is it" dialogue, I was met with Pokemon are nothing more than tools. Use them and throw them away. The black screen faded away, revealing an empty area at night. It looked familiar. I vaguely remembered it being a route to that earlier part of the game, but since it had been away from the game for so long, I couldn't just place it. In silence of the scene, the sprite was your arrival. The handcuffed note as Silver walked in the left, and then he moved a little slower than normal, as if I were hesitant to do something. Once he had moved to the middle of the screen, he stopped and turned back and then where he came in, and turned on towards where he was going, and then turned back forwards, and he came to the opening once again. For a moment he stood there, simply staring towards the left side of the screen, before the next dialogue popped up beneath him by saying nothing more than, after that, he then turned around yet again, only this time he continued to walk off screen. The screen then faded away to be replaced with Silver, standing in the place where you would first occasionally see him, just outside Professor Elm's laboratory. It was clearly slightly a later part of the game where the normal professor as an assistant exited out of the lab and went their separate ways. The assistants left the town, and Elm walked down further off down screen, which I assumed meant to be left for his home, and remained in the town, and the character Gold was nowhere to be seen. After that small scene, it stayed on Silver. I thought the game had froze for a moment, but I finally realized that I was able to move him. Suddenly I was a little excited as Silver was, and always had been, my favorite of the rivals. It was interesting to think to be able to play as him. I moved him a little further downward to see if I was able to explore, but it stopped me each time I moved one step away from the front of the lab. The dialogue box popped up and said, "I can't leave yet," and then it backed up a step. I moved back to the place I originally been standing there and moved to the window. It worked much like a door and allowed me to enter Professor Elm's lab. Aside from the regular equipment, bookshelves, computers, trash cans, tables, and all that lab was empty, was then expected to since the employees must have left a moment ago. On the table was a single Pokeball. Without the one at the moment, I walked over and took it. The dialogue box popped up and it said, "Obtain Totodile," but no item get music played. Apparently, stealing wasn't really a condition by the game. After pressing A, giving me the option to name my Pokemon, I picked yes and started naming these things. It took me to the naming screen, and another dialogue box popped up, interrupting the name process. "Don't name it. You'll only get attached. Don't love it. Use it." It was the voice of the same person who spoke at the very beginning, but I found it odd. The naming screen then faded away, leaving me in the empty lab, which I quickly tried to leave through the front door, but it was stopped by Silver saying, "Not through here." Again, he backed me out of the exit and through the window I had came in. As if things weren't strange enough as they were, I left the New Bark town and beginning the adventure by stepping into the grass. It was nearly impossible to get a random battle to start. Normally I would go out of my way and avoid them later on in the game, but during the beginning it was something I enjoyed to get my Pokemon to level up. Being unable to find something in a fight was a little frustrating. After several minutes of walking back and forth in patches of grass, I finally encountered the Pokemon, a Sentret then out of nowhere of the ordinary, but then that was when I set out my Totodile and chose only presentably useful to move that he had with Scratch. The Pokemon fled. I was rather confused. Pokemon never ran, not so early in the game. After a few more tries with all the outcome, I continued on to Cherry Grove. Just before I entered the city, I recognized a little small area known as Silver, and he walked through the beginning after entering the city. I bumped into Gold, who wordlessly challenged me into the battle. His Pokemon Cynical was already at a higher level than mine. I was stuck at level 5, and he was already at level 7. Even though I had the type advantage, he beat me before whiting out. His sprite then switched out the Cyndaquils, and then he looked disappointed. After exiting Cherry Grove Pokemon Center, I hadn't used it prior. It was apparently the only option I had. I walked back to the place and challenged me, only to find out I was unable to battle him again at this point. The game was getting a little annoying now. I had no money, no Pokegear or Pokedex. I was unable to battle wild Pokemon. Fortunately, once I entered Route 30 onward, there was other Pokemon trainers that I wish I could battle and easily defeat, although most of them seemed to be eager to speak to me as I won. By the time I entered Violet City, my Pokemon's level was still too low to take on the gym leader, but with the money I had won from trainers I fought before, I was at least able to buy some potions, so I felt that I was all set. The lesser trainers of the gym were easy though. I was only forced to use 2 of my previous purchased potions and leveled up once. Although, as I took on the gym leader, he provided me too much and I lost again. Upon winning, he then did the same thing Gold had done. He then looked disappointed as well. When the battle ended, I didn't white out. Rather, I endured a lecture about treating Pokemon correctly from the leader. Once he finished speaking, I received one worded out option, Steel. I chose my only option given to me, yes. Silver backed up and then slammed into the gym leader, kicking him backwards with another dialogue appear, telling me that I'd stolen the gym badge TM31 and 500. And after that, I whited out. Now, this was how it continued the remainder of the game. While I was able to defeat lesser trainers on the paths and to the cities and the gyms, I constantly lost due to the leader and was forced to steal their badges, steal their option, and also worked on the people who would normally give you items in the game. This was how I was able to contain key items, such as the item finder, the bicycle, the water pail, HMs, and many more. They refused to give me anything otherwise. Anyone I spoke to either refused to talk, treated me with, or lectured me about how I should properly treat Pokemon. It was at the beginning that let me get away with Nurse Joy as well, but by the time I progressed to Goldenrod City, anytime I white out, she scolded me. The Pokemon continued to avoid me as well, even if I wanted to do better. My team had the hope and that the Pokeballs I used to work for the first time. That was a stranger and random the battles I get. Even I locked up the Pokemon in battle with Mean Look, and the Pokemon passed out. Literally after my first attack with Mean Look. And if I got to the first attack, it was sometimes the Pokemon has a higher speed than mine. Before I was able to choose another, the Pokemon would faint on its own. The dialogue box proclaimed, Pokemon forced itself to pass out, and then the battle ended. The only thing that seemed to go normally for me was the battles with Team Rocket. I won against each of them, and they always treated me like a punk kid who's getting their way. For the rest of the game, up until a certain point that was entirely important, aside with win, lose, and steal, everything was more or less normal. While my Pokemon matured slowly due to frequent losses, they began to grow like a little, as I began giving them haircuts and other things to boost our bond. The last thing I checked, the person who rated their happiness was only a very few people who spoke to me normally. They said, "It's quite cute." Now I know you must have been thinking it wasn't very disturbing at all, and I should just accept the fact that it was simply a hacked game and made to tell Silver his side of the story. Well, but I'm not quite finished yet. Once I finally made it to Kanto, continuing the process of win, lose, and steal, I ventured off to Viridian City. The second I stepped foot into the city, the music cut off. I thought for a second that it was simply a glitch programming. It was how I had to walk through the soundless part of the game. But as I stood there for a moment, a very faint noise picked up and faded away. Now I was sure how the music was messed up, but like if it was trying to play, but it couldn't. As I stepped back into the route that I just came from, the music picked up perfectly. It was only the Viridian City was silent. Now I was curious, so I stepped back into the silent city and began to explore. There wasn't a person in sight. No one out in the open, no one in the houses, not even anyone in the Pokemart or in the Pokemon Center. The city was entirely empty, just as the silence and just the occasional soft noises which hadn't been identified. As I walked in towards the gym, the sound grew louder and louder. I figured out the noise where it was coming from the inside. So I entered, and then there was no one there early either, so that was to be expected. The gym has always been empty until much later. The noise didn't play here though, but it was, still dead silent. I walked up to where the gym leader would normally stood, and as I walked past by the spot and into the brink of the wall, I do that sometimes, like the noise, and I transported to another room. The wall had hidden the set of marks of stairs. This place was silent as well, but the noise began to play yet again. It was much louder this time, just like a bunch of random, high-pitched noises, but it sounded like screams. By this time, as you can imagine, my heart was pounding. I didn't take screaming or things that sound like screaming, due to all fortunate experiences a very graphic haunted house when I was 3 years old, but I digress. Regardless of the pounding and heart attack and shaking hands, I explored the room, which was tinted and muted did red, as everything was in Pokemon Red. The room followed with a sideways zigzag pattern, and the screams came at random. Some short, some long, some drawn out, and it sounded like if someone was being tortured. As I continued down the zigzagging hallways, I came across some disturbing images, sprites of NPCs without even their heads, as well as heads without bodies. Every time I tried examining them, Silver simply say, "Don't look." The bodies and heads became more frequent as I went on, clogging up the highways and only leaving a small path for me to follow. It started screaming became more frequent, just as the screen began to flicker as I walked, just like if it would if my Pokemon was poisoned. But none of them were. Just in case, I checked the stats of my party. None of them were poisoned, but their health was going down. I attempted to heal them, like I picked a super potion out of my bag and used it on my Feraligatr. The dialogue box popped up and said, "It won't have any effect." Now I was disturbed. I knew none of this was supposed to happen regardless, but I continued on, hoping that if they were just fainted from this, I'd be taken back to the Pokemon Center and things would return to normal. It was stupid of me to assume that. I continued down the Morpin path, the screen flickering in and out. Finally, Silver had stopped. The dialogue box popped up, telling me that my Pokemon had fainted, but it didn't say that I hoped. It said, "All dead." By now, I was about to cry. I couldn't help but stop myself from trying to get the end of this disturbing experience. If I didn't do this now, I'd be tempted to try again some other time. Finally, I reached the center of the room, which was now tinted in a deep red. I assumed that this was to simulate the fact that the room was filled with blood. However, there were only a few bodies scattered around in the center. There were a few 5 figures, a man, a Pokemon, Gold, and another Pokemon I can only assume was Typhlosion. Now, the Gold Typhlosion attacked the man's Pokemon. It was quickly struck down as its sprite was turning red, then the gray, then disappearing. The man's Pokemon had killed it. Of course, Silver's sprite had stepped forward on its own, and the man finally acknowledged me that I was there. "Giovanni." "Ah, son, you've made it. Come to see your rival's demise, have you?" This caused Gold to turn around and look at you. The only thing he said was nothing. Silver then continued to move out on his own. He approached the man and kicked him backwards, which obviously enraged Giovanni. "You're going to help him? You're going to help just because he's weak of others? If you seems to be saving you, perhaps I should show you that there's no sense on getting attached. Mewtwo, take care of him." Mewtwo obeyed the creator's command and approached Gold. I was still uncertain of what it actually did, but it struck Gold, causing him to scream louder than before as the sprites of Silver's rivals lost, then faded into deep and red into gray. "Giovanni, I told you a long time ago. Silver and Pokemon are nothing but tools. People are as well. Use them and throw them away once they have served you more purpose. Mewtwo, kill him." Mewtwo didn't obey this time. Giovanni's words must have arranged it, and then it turned to him as she spoke. "You're no longer useful." It struck Giovanni that it had done the Golden Typhlosion, but the scream Giovanni produced was much longer than any other I heard. Mewtwo was killing him. Finally, the scream faded away to nothingness, and Giovanni's sprite had just did as Gold's did, only leaving Silver and Mewtwo alive in the room. As Mewtwo turned to face me, I knew that wouldn't last long. Not useful. It struck me. Inflating battle music, which I was totally unable to participate. My sprite was in the very place of that Pokemon. My health was full, but I knew that wouldn't help. I chose to run, but I couldn't. I chose to attack, but it had no use. I just had to stand where as Mewtwo used Psychic on Silver's defenseless image. Weaving the sound now turned to a low level. The scream coming from Silver disturbingly was loud, even though the battle then faded away. The scream still lingered until Silver's sprite had seemed to turn to gray, which now I assume symbolizes the coldness of death. Silver, along with Gold and everyone else had been unfortunate enough to wander through this place from Viridian, was now dead. The screen then faded back to black, and all except for Mewtwo's sprite, which remained at the center of the screen. My paranoid mind immediately made me think of somehow was going to turn on me next. Then the word "end" simply faded in just underneath of him, and then the screen cut to black, taking me back to the opening sequence. I'm still unsure by why this was made. Someone would just shove it into a box and sell, and why wouldn't that happen to find it? But I can assure you that I'm swearing it all off and randomly found games. It's either new or I'll never risk touching it again. The game had described that has slipped out of my possession since I first played through. I have no idea where it is, but I hope it's rotting in a dumpster somewhere. And that, my little pretties, was Pokemon Tarnished Gold, a Pokepasta. My final thoughts on the story? Well, to be completely honest, I actually like this story. This story was actually a pretty interesting one for what it is. Now, I know this story was, I guess you could definitely say, was a pretty old pasta. Like, I don't know when this was made, maybe in I don't know, 2010 or something like that. It's a pretty good story for what it is. Now, I could definitely say that this story was actually a pretty good one for what it is. Now, this story was written by somebody that wrote it on DeviantArt, but of course the author must have deactivated his account, unfortunately. But I can definitely say this story, on the other hand, was a pretty good pasta for what it is. Now, I could definitely say that this story was actually really good and well made. I know this story is also on well, it's also on DeviantArt, so somebody also archived it as well. So I could definitely say this story was actually pretty good for what it is. Now, I'm don't really remember this story, I don't remember if I narrated this. I might have narrated it, but probably just don't remember. I know it's been, quite a long time since I last sat there and narrated this, so I'm just going to be honest. Now, the original person, well, on DeviantArt who made it, unfortunately closed his account, so I can't really say who, if he really did this. So I'm not really sure about who he is. So with that being the case, I don't know who the original author is for that matter. So if I do find out who the original author is, I'll be sure to give him proper credit. So with that being, or her for that matter. So with the author, I really hope the author, really likes the story, likes the fact that they wrote a really good story. Now, this story was actually a pretty interesting concept. Yet I do know there are cliches in the story, but it's still a pretty good story for what it is. Like, besides the cliches that were incorporated in the story, it's still really well made in detail. Now, I've seen this pasta, a lot of people have sat there and narrated this story, so yeah, I've seen a couple of narrations of this story, and this story was actually pretty interesting for what it is. It's a pretty interesting story. It was actually had a lot of time and effort into it. It's just a really well made story, so I definitely have to say it's a pretty good pasta for what it is. Now, yet again, I'm still saying I don't know who the original author is, so if I do find out who the original author is, I'll be sure to, well, give him or her proper credit. This was a good story. I really do like it. There's definitely a lot of time and effort into the story, so there's that. Now, I could definitely say here and right now that the grammar is really good, along with the sentence structuring, the paragraph structuring, the storyline, everything about it was just flat out amazing. Like, the author, whoever he or she is, must have put a lot of time and effort into the story. And yeah, I could definitely say this was actually pretty disturbing at certain parts, so I'm not gonna lie. This was actually disturbing at certain parts. But other than that, the story was really well done, really well made, and the author must be proud of him or herself for making this. So, it's actually, I'm probably going to start to try to read more Pokepastas in the future. If you have Pokepastas you've written, guys, feel free to let me know. Now, with that being the case, I actually found this story to be a pretty interesting story for what it is. Now, I can't really say anything negative about it. The only thing I wasn't crazy on was the cliches that were incorporated, there was just a few cliches in this story, but if you guys want to point out the cliches, let me know in the comments below. But anyways, with that being the case, yeah, to the author, you did a good job with this story. If you do find out this channel and let me, or this video, please comment down below so I can give you proper credit. If the original author does comment, I'll give him or her proper credit. Like, I can just edit the, description about it later on. So, it's just going to be anonymous for now because I don't know who the original author is. So, with that being said, let's get down to my final rating. Now, yeah, like I'm gonna say right now, and like I always continue to say, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of the story, it gets a 10 out of 10. It's a pretty good story, really good, really well made, and it's really well awesome. So, with that being the case, and with that being said, it gets a 10 out of 10. Besides the fact that the cliches were in it, but the reason why I get it a full 10 out of 10 is because it's an old creepypasta. I'm not really sure when this was made. I think in 2011 or 2012, around that corner. So this was actually an old pasta. It's still a good one. I can definitely say it's a still good pasta. So, anyways, with that being the case, and with that being said, what did you guys think about this creepypasta or gaming pasta? Did you all enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done person to help make this story a lot better? Leave me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you happen to be brand new here on this channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload so that you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.